Hello, this is Adewale from StressTherapist.net. The best way to be successful in solving many life problems is to first find out what caused the problem. Without this understanding, it will be like we are throwing darts at a bullseye blindfolded, meaning we may never ever get to solve the problem. We can apply this analogy to our efforts for overcoming depression. You see, many people try to deal with their depression by applying purely common sense, only to find their efforts failing repeatedly. If you fall into this group of people, my humble suggestion is that your efforts will be more successful when you add a solid knowledge of what caused your depression to your use of common sense. Doing this will be like taking the blindfolds off, as it will help you understand the practical steps you can take to break free from your depression. In today's video tutorial, my aim is to arm you with a solid knowledge of what causes depression so that you have a strong foundation that shields you against repeated breakdown. So I urge you to watch the video to the end and see what you think.
Current research studies suggest that all humans are vulnerable to developing depression after experiencing a minimum of 4 to 6 traumatic experiences in their lifetime. Now, the likelihood of developing depression increases by 50% if we experience a major trauma between the ages of 0 to 10. Some examples of things that could be classed as traumatic are loss of a loved one, parent, grandparent, or even a friend, as well as things like abuse or bullying. Now you might be thinking, surely there are people who have had experiences of trauma between the ages of 0 to 10 who did not go on to develop depression. Why are these people different? Well, if you had the opportunity to take a look into the background history of these individuals, you will notice that somewhere along the line, they received support, care, or guidance that enabled them to learn adequate coping strategies. Those who go on to develop depression do so because in their best efforts to cope with the very difficult situations they find themselves in, they learned to rely on ineffective thinking and behavioral styles. For example, I often come across people who think like this: it's better for me to think and expect things to go wrong because if it does go wrong, I will be prepared to handle it. Unfortunately, these thinking and behavioral styles eventually wrap us up in a survival-focused mentality, meaning that we end up feeling like we are just managing to survive on a daily basis. As stated earlier, traumatic experiences between ages 0 to 10 increases our vulnerability to depression. Outside that age range, we can still develop depression if we fall into negative thinking and behavioral habits. You see, these negative thinking and behavioral styles constantly make our minds feel like we are under constant threat. As a result, we end up having a high degree of the stress hormone cortisol in our systems. Too much cortisol over a long period of time reduces the availability of happy chemicals in our brain. I've discussed this extensively in my tutorial on depressive thinking, so be sure to check it out if you haven't done so yet. Essentially, what I'm saying is that regularly engaging in negative thinking and behavioral styles makes us more vulnerable to developing depression. Regularly engaging in negative behavioral styles keep our toxic stress levels high, which then turns down the availability of antidepressant hormones in our system. As you can see in this diagram, depressive thinking causes a high level of cortisol in our system. Now, assuming that this broken line, this thick broken line, is your stress threshold. This is the point where antidepressant hormones start to become insufficient. You can see in this diagram, because there is a lot of cortisol already present, the room remaining before hitting the threshold is very little. So, with a constantly high degree of cortisol, we will naturally find that we have little space for coping. And since our coping cup is almost full, just a tiny amount of pressure pushes us easily to the depression breaking point. When people have reached this point, I often hear them saying things like, I used to be able to cope with a lot more. I don't know what has changed. They feel like something irreparable has been broken within them. As a result, they can't cope as they used to. In my experience as a mental health practitioner, I used to wonder why some people seem more able to bounce back easier from depression after receiving support or treatment, whilst others tend to relapse repeatedly. Recently, many research data now suggest that the reason for this difference all boils down to habitual approaches to managing stress. Because these individuals were generally more effective at managing stress, after they recover, they return to their effective thinking and behavioral styles, which keeps the levels of cortisol down. This does two things. Firstly, their antidepressant hormones return to the necessary levels. And then secondly, their headroom for coping increases vastly. As a result of this, their recovery from depression is more sustainable. Now, contrast this with people who don't manage stress well. These individuals are regularly pushed beyond their coping threshold. Hence, they experience recurring relapse and they become locked in level 2 depression. In level 2 depression, people start to become depressed about being depressed. At this stage, people develop the belief that something abnormal about them is keeping them in that depressed state. They find that no matter how hard they're trying, they just experience this pressure that just keeps holding them back. Hence, they feel like they will never break free from depression. Now, this belief creates a thinking style of its own, adding to the pressure and increase in cortisol levels.
So, how can we use all this information for overcoming depression? Or maybe the question I should be asking is, what stops you from being that individual who learns to manage their stress so well that you gain a sustainable victory over your depression? You see, by learning more effective ways of thinking about problems, as well as learning to react more effectively to difficult situations, you too can experience that sustainable recovery. The good news is that the StressTherapist.net website has been created with the aim of giving you the knowledge, skill sets, and tools to help you achieve this. So, I encourage you to sign up for our depression updates, as this will guide you step by step through a process that reduces your toxic stress and depression. Finally, don't forget to spread the word. If this video has been helpful to you, then pass the link on and help someone else.